If you clicked on this video because you want to deepen your connection with God, but you don't feel like you're hearing Him, I want to offer you some help and encouragement today. I'll share a quick story from a couple of days ago. I was driving back after seeing a friend, and as often happens when you're on your own in the car, I was reflecting on the conversation. I was thinking about what my friend said, I was thinking about what I said, and you often think of things that you could have said better that would have better illustrated a point or whatever you're trying to get across. And there was a part in the conversation where we were talking about work, and my friend said, "Oh, I feel bad for meeting up with you at the moment because you're so committed to your work." And I've found when God gives you blessings, you have to ride the momentum. So it's only temporary. And then, at the moment, my business is doing well and the YouTube videos are doing well. So I feel obligated to take the blessings that God is offering me and run with it. So I'm going to continue make the videos as much as I can. But this takes time away from maybe your social life and things like that. So I was reflecting on that part of the conversation because I felt bad. I don't want to make someone feel like they're less important than my work. So that was the bit of the conversation I was reflecting on. And I had a phrase come to mind of something I could have said to the person, which is, "A man's purpose is his work." But then I realized in that moment, that isn't my voice that was saying that. And I don't even believe it to be true. So I'm thinking I could have said this to this person and it isn't even me. And the reason I know it isn't me is because I know whose voice it is. It's Stefan Arnio. He's a great author. May he rest in peace. He died at quite young. I've read loads of his books. And the only reason I recognize that thought as being his voice is because I listen to his books as audiobooks, because he's got a great voice. So when that came to mind, I could have said that to this person in the conversation, "A man's purpose is his work." That isn't me, and I don't even believe it to be true. It just kind of fit in the conversation. So if you can't hear God's voice, this is the reason why. In your head, you will have 3 different voices. There will be your ego, outside influence in the form of somebody else's ego, and then God's voice. So I hope I can illustrate this point. That thought I had was Stefan Arnio's voice. That was an outside influence, somebody else's ego in the world. Then I could have had my ego, which was probably what I replied with. Then there's God's voice, which is the truth. And that's the one you're trying to hear. But at the moment, all you're hearing is your own ego and somebody else's ego. So this happens all the time. And it's very hard to distinguish. And it's hard to distinguish because it's very subtle, and they all are in your voice because it's your tone that's in your own head. So when I had that thought pop up, "A man's purpose is his work," it sounded like my voice. But because I've heard enough of Stefan Arnio's books in the audiobook, I could hear it in his voice. So I was like, "Oh, that's not me," and I don't believe it to be true. So you need to ask yourself, how many times are you having thoughts come in, which is a voice, it's your own voice inside your head, but they're not true, you don't believe them, they're not even your ego, and they're not God speaking. This happens all the time. When you turn the radio on, somebody's song lyrics are penetrating into your mind, and that song might be a love song, a heartbreak song, a rap song where he's talking about drugs and degeneracy. You know this is true because you'll find yourself 2 days later singing that song. You might not even like the song, but it's repetitive and it ends up in your mind. So if you want to hear God's voice clearly, you need to discern between these 3 voices: your ego, somebody else's ego, and God's voice. So to give you another quick little analogy for this, imagine you was in a room and there's 10 of you, and each version of you is saying something slightly different. If you couldn't see them, well, even if you could see them because they all look like you, you're not going to know which is which. They've all got your tone of voice and they all look like you. But if you sit and observe them for long enough, they might all have different traits that you could pick up on. So say you've got a friend that you know well, they're in your body with your voice, and then there's you in your body with your voice. you would be able to tell the difference because you know what you're like and you know what your friend's like, but they both look the same, like Agent Smith in The Matrix. That's what it's like trying to hear God's voice. It sounds like you, it's in your head, but it's God's voice, but it's quite easy to mistake it. So a Bible verse that comes to mind is Psalm 37 verse 7. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently. I actually went on a little mission to buy the New International Version of the Bible just purely for this one line, because I think it's beautiful. And that's what's required. You have to be still and observe, whose voice is this? Is it my ego? Is it the outside world in the form of somebody else's ego? Or is it God? So the way you do this is basically meditation. Now, prayer is a good way of communicating with God, but I've struggled with prayer for a long time. It never seemed to work for me, and recently I've found a lot of value in prayer. But the reason prayer probably isn't going to be the best route to hearing God's voice is because prayer is speaking in itself your own voice, so you end up just hearing yourself. So you'll say a prayer and then you'll keep talking. Did I say that right? I wonder if the voice keeps going. Meditation is different. You just be still before the Lord and wait patiently. You sit in silence, so there's no voice. And it's easier if you're in a room where there's 5 people all talking over each other. You can't tell what any of them are saying. But if it was silent and one person speaks, you would know instantly who's talking. So that's what you do. You be still and you wait. If you want to pray, I do 2 types of prayer. One type of prayer is where I know what I want to say and I'm not really expecting anything back from God, and I'll write it out. I normally do this in the form of a novena, which is 9 days in a row, and it's normally expressing gratitude, and that's the prayer. Then there's a second type of prayer where I'm actually expecting an answer, and I do that before these videos. So it's a very brief prayer, and then you sit in silence for up to about half an hour. So you would say, Heavenly Father, I'm extremely grateful for the reach that my YouTube videos are having at the moment. I pray that you guide me in what to say that will benefit people. Thank you. Amen. Then I'll sit in silence, expecting nothing, and meditate. And I'm being present. I'm listening to the birds. I'm listening to my dog behind me running around. And I don't expect anything. And then usually a voice will come in. It might be a line of a book I read, so that's somebody else's ego. It might be something I said to a friend, or a joke I made that was really funny and I'm quite proud of it. Oh, that's my ego. Then there's this other voice. I had it with a title of a video the other day. The herd can only take you so far. It's time to join God's flock. I was like, oh, that's a video. And then I make the video. So sit quietly before the Lord and wait patiently. That is how you hear the voice. Now, just to give you an example, I only make these videos in the morning before I've eaten anything and before I've exposed myself to any other outside influencers. As soon as you open your phone and go on YouTube, my business requires that I look at comments on TikTok and YouTube. As soon as I read somebody else's comment, as nice as they are, that's somebody else's ego. That might change. I now can't hear God's voice. So if you've probably had this before. You get in somebody's car and they've got the radio on really loud and you're having a conversation and you're sort of competing with the radio. You're trying to talk over it. I always just think, either turn the radio off and we'll talk, or we'll just listen to the music. There's no point. And the same in conversations. You might have that one friend who every time you start talking, they talk over you. They're not really that bothered about your story. So you just stop talking. It doesn't bother you. You just listen to their story. And then you go to speak, but they talk over you. And then you stop, because there's no point speaking when somebody's not listening. Well, God is like this. If you've got the radio on, God's not going to talk to you. You know, he's not going to compete with the radio. If you want to listen to the radio, that's fine. If you want to talk to God, then you need to make time for that. God doesn't shout, he whispers. So if you've got the radio on, you're not going to hear him. If you're scrolling on YouTube or you're watching a YouTube video, you're not going to hear him. He's not going to compete with you watching a documentary about dolphins. Do you know what I mean? When David Attenborough is telling you about dolphins, he'll wait. But the problem is, we never make time. When do you meditate? When do you sit in silence before the Lord and wait to hear his voice? Very rarely. Even when you're praying, you're talking. Do you ever stop for half an hour? You know, it might take God half an hour. It does, like, but to realize you're listening. Oh, I'll speak to him now. I'll speak to her now. This is what I've found. So sit quietly, just not thinking and not consuming something, some form of media, whether it's the radio on quietly in the background, is fasting. You're fasting from outside ego. You know, the food is a different subject, but you got your ego, which is a voice in your head, other people's ego in the form of books, movies. You know, when you hear a line of a movie in your head, that isn't your ego. It isn't even the actor's ego. It's the script writer. There's a script writer somewhere in the world who's speaking inside your head. And then there's the voice of God. So we fast from the first two. We fast from our own thoughts. I'm not going to think. I'm going to just be present. And we fast from other people's thoughts, other people's egos. I'm not going to watch a movie. I'm not going to listen to the radio. And then what's left? What's left is silence and presence and stillness. You wait in stillness and be patient, and then the Lord will come. And then that is how you hear God clearly. So I hope that helps. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently. Speak to you soon.